Good afternoon, everybody.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back from lunch. Thanks for coming.
My name is Justin Gelinas. I am the co-founder and chief creative officer for Britelite Immersive.
And I am Jeremy Rosenblum. I'm the CEO and also co-founder of Britelite Immersive. And we would like to take a minute to talk to you today about a little bit about our process and how we sort of avoid the bright, shiny box concept and avoid using technology just for technology's sake and try to make things really compelling, both for our clients and for the end users. So I think Justin can kick off with a little bit about who we are, what kind of company we are, and why you should be listening to us at all. And then we'll dive into some case studies and really go through like what's involved in it, what we see when we're in the room with clients when they're making these decisions, and ultimately what came from it.
So we are an experience design company that focuses on immersive storytelling, oftentimes using bleeding edge tools and communication platforms. We're based out of San Francisco, California. Our team is comprised largely of two different departments. One of the departments is a creative team, so visual effects artists, animators, UX designers, motion graphics artists, traditional creative workflow. And then the second team is our team of developers. So people that are doing things like game development, front-end development, as well as back-end development. So when I say that, building custom content management systems, render engines, basically means of the functional pieces in which we're telling the stories to create. The type of projects that we typically take on as a company, I'll advance here. The type of projects that we typically take on are interactive projects using kinetic or motion capture systems, embedded sensor technology or sensor fusion, interactive or very large, immersive, ultra-high definition content. In addition to that, we're working with virtual and augmented realities and then back-end system architecture. We wanted to talk about a couple different projects specifically. There's two different types of projects that we typically take on as a company. We've got the event stuff, which is oftentimes product launches for things, if a company's launching something new and they want to create a really memorable or unique way of doing that. The other type of event opportunity would be something like this, for example, creating content or experiences within trade show environments. And then the second piece of our business is really focused around permanent installations. So things that exist in stadiums, in future retail spaces, curatorial, or also executive briefing centers. So we brought two different case studies that we think really represent two different pillars of the type of projects that we typically take on. And we think that it'll give you guys a little bit more visibility into our process, our methodologies, and ultimately how do we get to our end goals, using research and strategy to get there.
So as Justin was saying, this sort of represents the first pillar of our business, the Facebook Davos World Economic Forum install that we did. It was for Facebook, for the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland. They came to us looking for a really high impact way to tell stories using emerging technology. And when we internalized those kind of asks, and I'll talk a little bit more about what the initial ask was, we try to always have the mind of coming up with digital solutions to solve marketing challenges and coming up with creative solutions to solve technology problems. It's only when you really get a marriage of the two that you end up with something that's truly compelling, that's useful, that works well for the client to get their message across and for the users to get something that's really, really interesting and new and unique. So Facebook came to us. You want to advance it one for me?
Yep.
Facebook came to us and Sheryl Sandberg was going to be hosting some of the world's top economic and political leaders at this conference, and they were trying to communicate with them, as they sort of put it, in a high-impact manner using emerging technology. And that immediately sort of raises some red flags for us internally. Yeah, we are an emerging technology company. You probably are coming to us wanting something that is involving emerging technology, but that's sort of an interesting way to lead the conversation. If you come and you say, I want something big and flashy, you've sort of tried to already solve your own problem. You haven't, I now, and we as a team, have to swim upstream on that to try to understand, well, something's happening in your world or in the communication you're using now that you feel like isn't effective. And the way that you tried to solve it off the top of your head was with new and emerging technology, but that's very, very broad. So we want to get in, we want to swim upstream from that a little bit and try to figure out what's going on, what are you really trying to say, what's the content message there, and then how can we use technology to tell those stories, as opposed to just saying, yeah, sure, we've got a VR setup, let's go install some VR. People like VR, it's new, it's cool. Great, maybe that doesn't actually serve the goal of what we're trying to do here. So what we figured out and what they really wanted to tell people is how Facebook can help to grow small businesses throughout the world and the economic impact that Facebook has in developing nations. And when you break that down kind of one step higher, I guess, break it up one step higher, I don't know. You're talking about connectivity. You're talking about things having a unity to them, things being interconnected both in the world, online, and in communication. And so we really wanted to figure out a way to tell that story. You want to go one more? So we ended up with two components to this, both of which really stressed the idea of connectivity and ended up using some really interesting technology. We had a couple of issues here. I mean, it was a very, very fast turnaround for the timeline, and it was a very interesting space to work in because it was just a very unique environment as far as installation and putting everything in, but you can't let that dictate your creative output. You have to sort of lead with the story. You have to lead with what's going to be effective and find a way to make that work, as opposed to sort of being, well, I'm in a weird environment, I'm not going to try to do that. Do you want to talk a little bit more about what we actually installed?
Yeah, basically, it ultimately came down to two different activations here. You can see on the top left image, you've got a photo of a tabletop, and then beside that, you've got this 360-degree array. I'll start with the 360 array. It was comprised of 54 different HD displays. It kind of looked like a really big tree, and we created this, what was called Global Voices. We created an app that basically allowed administrators to augment the content that was on those screens at any given time based on who was in the room. The one thing about this particular environment, it was a very curated space. Cheryl was working with top leaders of world economics and political leaders and dignitaries. So it's not as though there was a lot of different people in the space at once. It was curated very much for who was in the space at any given time. So we developed a number of different stories that could kind of be ciphered depending on who was in the room, just with a swipe of a button. And that was really interesting from a technology standpoint to really tell all these different stories about what was happening in all these different regions around the world and how it impacted global economics. The second project that we did for them was using a touchscreen using object recognition. So we were able to use physical products to tell digital stories in a means of kind of augmenting and dropping people in. When we think about creating immersive stories and immersive kind of exhibitions, if you will, what we're really trying to do is break through the digital noise and allow people to be dropped in and hold them there in that moment in a way that's going to keep them engaged and keep them present. And when you're able to tie in a physical product into that activation or that interactive layer, then it's just one more piece to really keep them focused on what it is that they're engaging with. So in this case, I think we had a total of 4 or 5 different stories that we curated. We were working with small businesses from all around around the globe in different regions, and each object represented its own unique story. So we could bring that object on, we could learn all about the demographics in which this small business was able to tap into, how Facebook ultimately lifted their brand and their product into a more global visibility, more or less. And it was a really unique, really memorable project for Cheryl. Yeah,
and I think what's sort of important to point out is that it doesn't have to wow factor comes from the experience. It doesn't come from, you think about you watch a movie from the 70s and it still plays really well because the story is good. And then you go see a movie that has amazing special effects and you kind of leave I don't know if I really cared because the story wasn't good. It doesn't actually matter what you wrap it in if the story isn't good. So there's a lot of ways we could have tackled this project. And ultimately we led it with connecting to people. It's going to be a relatively small experience that needs to both be readable for the person doing it and then connect to everybody else in the room and allow them to sort of understand what was happening for this person's journey and how that journey further impacts what is going on both in the world and at Facebook today. So, you know, sometimes to literally avoid the bright, shiny box, you want to go with something that is really impactful, but not necessarily something that has the most like show factor right off of the top.
Cool. So the next project that we wanted to give you some visibility into was one that we just wrapped up with in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Actually, just a couple weeks ago, we launched it with the governor of Massachusetts and their CEO. It's for a company called Amgen, and we were brought into the project to help to design and develop an immersive science exhibit in their lobby. One of the things that's worth kind of giving some visibility into with Cambridge, Massachusetts, you know, similar to where we are in San Francisco, it's a heavy tech community. There's a lot of really amazing companies and entrepreneurs and technologists there. So we wanted to do something that was going to be relevant and also kind of open up their doors in a way that's going to really feel invitational. I don't know, maybe we want to talk about the people that we were looking to.
So, I mean, this was another situation where they kind of came and were to us and asked us to make something really impressive. And immediately, you know, you start swimming upstream on that request. And what we figured out is that there really is Amgen itself as a company, when it's engaging in business, has a very clear story arc. They just don't always think of it that way. It starts with the people. Somebody gets affected by something. Somebody gets a disease. Somebody has a condition. Then it moves on to the researchers, and they dive into it, and they have their own story that they interact with. And then it moves on to actually developing the treatments and coming back around to the people. So we sort of identified this little bit of a cyclical story that exists and wanted to highlight that and show visibility. Each different part of the company sees a different part of this story. And so we wanted to make an experience where the researchers can show their colleagues what they're doing. People who are researching, who never see the patients, will see the patients and see the effect that their research has. And the patients can come in and, you know, partners for Amgen and see what is going on and really understand the company holistically. So this was something that, while it needed to be a single user experience, it actually was a group experience. Everyone who was engaging in any part of it had to be a compelling experience for the 15 other people standing behind them or 200 people standing behind them, so that they understood what was happening, but you still were engaged as the single user.
Yeah, I'd say the other piece with this project, you know, when we were beginning to ideate and consider what type of stories could we tell and how can we be effective with the solutions that we're going to propose, is really understanding all the other stakeholders that were in alignment as well, right? We were working with architects who were designing the space. So we can't just drop technology in there and expect for it to be holistic or expect for it to be cohesive in its story, right? So we were working really closely with a lot of different stakeholders, from the architectural team, from the facilities team on site. We were trying to understand as much as we could about the academic community that are in Cambridge, Massachusetts, because this is going to be an open invitational area. And then in addition to that, you know, really working closely with the scientific community there on site. This is the stuff that they're seeing underneath the microscope. So what we're going to be creating content-wise needs to be accurate. It needs to be representative of what they're seeing, so that story can ultimately feel, you know, really authentic and genuine.
Real, yeah. And you can see in, like if you see what the modality is or the cells there are on is a massive LED screen that then, because the place was under construction, we got to sort of run these columns up from the screen into the architecture and work with the architects to integrate their vision for the space into our technology and our creative vision for the space. Similarly, in the bottom right, you can kind of see it behind somebody, but we had these story columns that did patient stories. They're motion sensing. You walk up to them, and it begins to tell you a story about the client or the patient that is involved in the particular treatment. But then we actually put a very mellow one-way mirror in front of that, so that when it's not active, and even when it is, it's reflecting architectural elements from the screen. So it really feels like it's an integrated part of the space. It's not just a satellite screen kind of sitting there being its own thing. Everything really needed to feel like you're in the space. This is all supposed to be here. This is part of what they do and who they are as a company, and it's not just tacked on.
The other thing I'll just kind of add on to the experience, in the bottom right-hand corner, you see somebody driving this really large 4K touchscreen. Now that's controlling this really large LED wall. The unique thing about it is that kind of color spectrum of that modality is also controlling the color spectrum in the column. So we created a back-end architectural system that tied everything together. So one of the things that they really spoke to us about early on is the need and the desire to create this connected, holistic environment. So we really thought about that long and hard, and we considered that in the back-end system in which the content was being served. So as we're serving up stories specific to a particular modality and then the color arrangement around it, everything felt very, connected in that way. So I think that was a really cool piece of, what's under the hood and how that kind of made it happen.
You want to show the video?
Yeah, so we're going to show you guys a really quick video from this place as well.
Help you get a better idea of what this actually looks like. So to sort of wrap all that up, now that you kind of have an idea of what we do and a little bit of the thought process, we call it avoiding the bright, shiny box, but the real kind of takeaway is why strategy matters when you're involved in this sort of thing. And I think when we were starting as a company, we noticed that a lot of people were engaging in these types of sort of interactive and immersive and very high impact installs, and then generally kind of being unhappy with what turned out. They spent a ton of money. They went technology first in a lot of places, so they're like, we're going to buy an $800,000 video wall. What are you going to put on it? I don't know. We'll figure that out when it's installed. And we saw that as an issue. Not that we don't want to install an $800,000 video wall. We do that often. But we want to do it because it tells the right story. And we want to do it because it's going to be the right thing for the client. I can't tell you how many times somebody's come to us and been like, we really want to do a VR thing. And we kind of dig down and we're like, do you? Like, I think you actually might want to do an AR thing, or you might want to do a motion capture thing, or I get that you want people to feel connected to it, but that has its own good and bad parts. Not that we don't do VR, we absolutely do, and there are some very good uses for it. But leading with a strategy and a good story and good content is going to make it effective in a way that will allow the company to get things from their money that they didn't even know they needed. And sometimes really understand their problem more. We have gone into visioning sessions with companies that sort of started and they were, came to us and, well, we want to do this sort of system and, X system. And when we started to drill down to it, you actually discover like, well, we tried something else before and we thought this about it. And it's like, okay, well, let's clear that off the table and get one level higher and just really, really, really talk about what's important to you. What do you guys, and I think MoMA was a good example of that, where we went around and when we started the meeting, every single person that was a stakeholder had a different answer for what they thought was important about this project. And then we talked about it a little bit and went around the table again, and every single person had the same answer for what they were looking for. And that's a good place to build a system from. That's a good place to build a project from. And that's where we try to get with our clients. And even if, and we're resellers, we do a lot of reselling, and we sell better and more with a good strategy behind it and with good content to support it. And our clients feel really good about what they've spent after they've done it because of how compelling it ends up. So I think the message would sort of be, you know, the kind of firm that we are can be a great partner for integration people and producers and technology creators are great partners for us. The better we understand each other, the more we work together, the more we're sort of cohesive in the way that we attack these issues, the happier the customers are going to be, the more impressive the things are that are going to be installed, and the more people are going to want to do this sort of thing in the future.
Yeah, I would just add, you know, I think you kind of wrapped it up well right there, but just through the process, really trying to approach things technologically agnostic, right? Through the ideation process, really allow for the user-centered design to be really the leading force behind what technology is applicable. And, you know, we just found ourselves to be extremely successful in that mantra. So, you know, Jeremy and I, we're going to be hanging out for the next 30 minutes or so. If there's any questions, feel free to grab us. We'd love to hear about what you guys are up to and how we might be able to collaborate. You know, we're just really humbled to be here, and thank you all for the time.
Yeah, thanks so much for InfoComm, and thanks for coming, everybody.